Class of 1933 Architecture, conducted by Marilyn Summers on April the 15th, 1996, at Mr. Thompson's Atlanta, Georgia home. The subject of the interview is student life at Georgia Tech and Mr. Thompson's life specifically. Thank you so much for allowing us to join you here today. You're visiting your Atlanta home from New York City, and we're so pleased you made time for us, Mr. Thompson.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
Will you begin at the beginning with your story?
I was born in Atlanta on 216 Plum Street, which is now part of the Georgia Tech campus, in 1912. We moved to this house 6 years later when I was 6 years old. And this has been my home since that time, until I left to go other places, to New York and around the world.
What was going to Georgia Tech the first time that you actually, well, you didn't really go away from home, but what made you go to Georgia Tech? What was the decision?
I think the thing that influenced me most was my mother, who loved to draw up house plans herself. And I think because of that, and I had always enjoyed drawing and different things and sketching, but it was because of her interest in that probably what motivated me to go ahead and study architecture.
Where did you go to high school?
Boys High School.
And they were
over on Jackson Street, I think it was.
And they were preparing you for college.
Right.
Was there any question as to what college you were ever going to go to?
No, it was always Georgia Tech. My, well, that come later after I was in the midst of school.
But, okay, so do you remember the first time you ever saw the campus? Did you ever come before you actually enrolled, or was that the beginning enrollment?
No, I don't remember that. I'm sure I must have been over and around before then, but I don't remember any circumstances about it.
So you came to the campus in 1929 to go to school.
Right.
Was it what you expected?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. There was no surprises of any kind.
And how did you take to school?
Well, whatever was expected of me, I usually did. And so there was no...
You were a good boy, huh? How did you get to school every day?
I always hitchhiked to and from school, and sometimes I would roller skate there and back. Which is, how far is it from here to there? It must be about
ways.
3 or 4 miles.
4 miles at least, yeah. You must have had a very good athletic ability to be able to roller skate so far.
Well, I wore out many pairs of roller skates.
Did you have a lot of friends at school?
Yes, I think so.
It was a friendly environment?
Oh, yes, very, very nice. And
what was the architecture school like at that time? Physically, where did you attend classes? Do you remember?
In the physics building, mostly. Is that not, is it still there? Is it part of the architectural, no longer?
It's no longer part of it, but it's still there.
It was, most of it was in that building, I think.
Did you have big classes or small classes? Like how many people would have been in a class?
I don't recall.
Do you remember any of your professors?
I do. I remember Maurice Siegler, who taught charcoal drawing, and I remember Matt Jorgenson, and Professor Gailey, and also Professor Bush-Brown, who was the head of the department.
And they were primarily teaching you what type of architecture?
All different things, of the drawing of plans and also watercolor and...
It was quite a creative course then.
Yes, indeed.
You were called upon. And you enjoyed that?
Very much.
So you knew you were in the right place?
Right. I never had any concern about not being in the right place.
When you were a young student first coming, did you have to wear a rat cap? Do you remember that?
I think so, but not very long. I don't really recall too much, but we did for a short while.
What was Did you have a social life in addition to school, or was school your social life?
No, I had just the normal social life of any young kid, I guess.
Growing up in Atlanta?
Went to parties and dances, but other than that, no. Most of my time was concentrated on the school and studying.
What kind of things were expected? I mean, did you take place in any of the part in any of the competitions, or were you working on projects frequently?
Just working on projects mostly to get them in on time when they were due, and because of that, we often had to work nights on end to get them there when they were due.
And what kind of an experience was that?
Hard work, pressure, but interesting.
In 1929, the Fox Theater opened. Do you remember that? Did you ever go?
I certainly do, and I went to the Fox Theater almost every week.
Did you really?
Yes.
What was it like then? Pretty much as it is today, or not?
I haven't been in the Fox Theater for, I guess, 40 years, so I don't know. Is it still a theater? I mean, as a movie theater, or is it a...
Movies in the summertime. And
in the summer?
Performing arts other than that.
Well, it was... there were stage shows there, too, as well as the motion pictures.
And you were a picture fan?
Very much so. In fact, I had always wanted to be an actor in the movies. And I had the opportunity to later, but circumstances ruled it out.
So you could go to the Fox and dream about it anyways, huh?
Right.
Yeah. Overall, when you look back at that time, was it a happy time?
It was indeed a very happy time of my life. And although it was a very difficult time because we were quite rather poor and that's why I had to hitchhike to school every day, but it was a very happy time.
Well, the Depression came, and everybody was plunged into...
Well, before that, my father died when I was in the sophomore class. And I was going to quit school because of that, because there was no money to continue if he was dead. But my mother wouldn't hear of it. She insisted that I had to go to school, so she went out and got a job running an employment agency so that I could go on to school.
How wonderful. So you were doubly motivated then, not only to learn, but to...
Right.
Your mother's confidence in you had to be repaid, right?
Right.
You were on the honor roll. You did very well.
Yes, I was on the honor roll every year that I was there.
She must have been very proud of you then.
I hope so.
It wasn't really an expensive school, but any kind of money was hard to come by, right?
It certainly was.
So did the Depression affect you adversely, as we say?
Not really. I don't recall that. I'm sure it did my mother, though.
But you managed to just
Right.
go on. Do you remember graduation?
Not too well.
You don't remember where it was
I
held?
know I was a little apprehensive because of the Depression and wondering what I was going to do because there were no architects' offices open at all.
Well, what were people doing that were graduating? I mean, did anyone come to the campus and look for help, or
No.
Did you ever have any summer jobs?
Yes, as a matter of fact, before I started to Tech, my mother went uptown to Birge and Stevens Architects and talked to Mr. Birge and asked him if I could work to get a little experience at drawing, which he did. He gave me a job and I worked after school for a while there.
Was it a good experience?
Very much so. And I later, as a matter of fact, while I was working at Birge and Stevens after school during Tech, I drew up the date in the First Baptist Church on Peachtree Street, 1929, I think it is. And that was my first experience of having anything that I'd drawn put into concrete form.
Pretty nifty, huh? Pretty nifty.
I'll have to go by and see if it's still there.
Did you have any other jobs during the 4 years you were at school that were architecturally related?
Just working after school sometimes, and in the summer sometime, at Birge and Stevens, and at another one of the offices in town. I don't remember the name of it.
Were you aware of Neil Reed or Philip Schutze?
Yes, I knew of them, knew who they were.
Did they ever lecture in your classes or make any appearances?
I don't recall them doing any, no.
How about your classmates? Do you recall any of your classmates?
A few of them. I remember probably Hugh Stubbins more than anyone else, who he and I won the architectural awards at the end of at graduation. He was I really wasn't as interested in architecture as he was, and he was a better architect because he was completely absorbed by architecture, which I wasn't.
But you won an award? What kind of award was that?
I don't know. I won an architectural book of some sort, which I don't know where it is now. But he got the scholarship to Harvard further.
Oh.
Which he deserved because of his interest in architecture.
Did you ever stay in touch with him?
No.
After graduation,
no.
That was it. But you do remember him.
And I remember a few others, not too much. I remember who Galindo was a Latin American boy who was very good at freehand work, charcoal and things. But I don't remember many others. If I heard their names, I probably would recall them. But
was your graduation, you said you don't recall it very clearly. I wonder if it was held at the Fox. Because they did start holding some
I don't remember where it was held. No.
Well, then came the big deal. You were graduated, and what were you going to do? What happened?
I tried to get a job and could get nothing, and I decided to hitchhike out to California.
A long ways to go. Did you know anyone out there?
No, but I took off and hitchhiked out, and I started out with, I don't remember what it was, $18, I think, that I had saved up. And I went out and back, and when I got back, I still had $8.
My goodness. Well, where did you go out there?
I just visited Los Angeles and Hollywood, and went around to see the sights and came back.
Were you hoping to be discovered?
I would have liked to have been, but I did nothing about it and wouldn't know what to do about it.
So it wasn't an active job search, it was just an adventure.
Right.
An adventure. And so then what happened?
Now, I have made a mistake. I did this while I was in school one summer.
Oh, it was before graduation.
And it was after graduation that I went out thinking that I might find a job. The first time, you see, I told you I would forget the order of things.
That's fine. So you actually went to California
No, I hitchhiked the first time. I don't remember whether it may have been the year I got out of high school. When I got out of college, I did go out hoping that I might find something there, and my mother had told me that an old friend of hers was living in Los Angeles now, a lawyer whom he had gone with her they had gone together and was a very good friend, and to be sure to look him up when I got there. And so I looked him up in the telephone directory and told him who I was. And he said, would I please come by the office? He would like to meet me. And I went by, and he said, well, he lived in Glendora, California, and he would like for me to come out and spend the evening and visit and get to know his family. So I went out with him and stayed all summer. They were the most fabulous family that I had ever known in my life. They had 4 boys, some a little older than I and some a little younger. And they were constantly doing things, and after a week, I said, well, I must, and they wouldn't hear of me returning home. And I said, my mother will be completely upset. But they wouldn't hear of it, and they said, we've planned this to go here, to go there, or do something, and so I stayed all summer.
What a wonderful adventure for you.
In fact, they wanted me to stay and said, I'm sure you probably find a job here better than you can back in Atlanta.
But you didn't stay.
But I had to go home. My mother was...
waiting.
Yes.
So what happened when you came back to Atlanta? Could you indeed find a job?
I came back and I couldn't find a job. The only job that I could find, I answered an ad for a stockroom worker in Columbus, Georgia. And I went down there and went to work for $15 a week. It's the only job that I could find of any kind. And it was quite an experience while I was there.
How long did that last? Not very long, I wouldn't think.
It lasted about until I could save up enough money to hitchhike to New York.
You were going someplace where things were happening, right?
I wanted to get somewhere else.
So what year was it that you finally arrived in New York then?
I'm not sure. I think it must have been probably 1934 or 5.
And did you find a job there?
Well, I had been somewhat interested in illustration, illustrative art, the illustrations of stories and magazines, and since I had enjoyed doing sketching of all kinds, I thought I might be able to do that. And I took some drawings with me, some sketches I'd done, and I went to New York, got to the YMCA, and got a room at the Sloan House in New York, and took the telephone directory and looked up names of famous illustrators that I'd seen in magazines and found quite a few. And I thought I'd go around to see them and ask them what I should do to become an illustrator, and maybe they could give me some advice. And I found quite a number of them. They were all extremely nice, very nice. And one of them said, if I were you, though, I wouldn't go around telling the illustrators that you want to do illustrations. Said, why don't you tell them that you would like to pose for them and be a model? He said, you have very good bone structure and a nice physique, and they'd probably like to use you. He said, I'd like to use you, in fact. And I thought, well, that would be wonderful. I could make some money and make contacts.
It had never crossed your mind until then?
No. So I went around seeing the different, I looked particularly for Meade Schaefer, who was my favorite illustrator, but I couldn't find his name in the New York directory, so I guess he wasn't there. But I did find Dan Content, another one whose illustrations were very similar to Meade's. And he began using me as a model. They used models from life to do their illustrations at the time. And I asked him if he knew Meade Schaefer, and he said yes, they had graduated together and were very good friends, but Meade had a studio in New Rochelle, New York. And he said, I'm sure Meade would like to use you too, because you're just the type that he likes, model that he likes. Yeah, I'll tell him about you. And sure enough, Meade called me and asked if I could come up to New Rochelle and pose. And we became quite good friends, and I'd stay for dinner with he and his wife. And in fact, he suggested that why didn't I come up there and live? And there were a number of illustrators in New Rochelle, and Norman Rockwell and many other famous ones. And he said, I'd get a lot of work, but I wanted to stay in New York.
So you stayed in New York?
Yeah.
So how much time did you spend doing this? What period of time?
I guess that I was doing modeling for about 4 or 5 years, and I began, one of the illustrators that I was posing for said, well, you're stupid posing for illustrators. It's hard work, and you have to pose from life, and you should be posing for photography. He said, I know the art director up at Wilke, and said, I'm sure they would like to use you. And he sent me up, and they took photographs, and I began posing for photographs then instead of the...
So
began doing that for quite a long time.
One thing just evolved into the other.
They just lead one to another.
So how long did you spend being a model? And some of your things were rather famous, were they not?
Oh, yes.
Tell us about
billboards and magazines all over the place, everywhere. And,
who did you become famous as?
I began posing for Chesterfield cigarettes, and they used me almost exclusively for a while on their billboards and all of their ads, and then later for Camels too. But
back before that.
And for Texaco and practically all various companies.
You were a bit of a celebrity then.
Well, hardly, but.
So what made you change from being a model then? What happened next? What interest came up?
Well, I wanted to be an actor.
Well, that's a natural progression too.
And I got an agent, and he's got me, I began acting in summer theaters. I acted out at Southampton and out at East Hampton, Long Island, and then one of the Warner Brothers wanted to do a screen test of me, and they did one, which they didn't particularly like, and said, we'll do another one. But about this time, my sister in Atlanta had a nervous breakdown, and my mother was very much upset, and she was about to have one if I didn't come home. So I left New York and came back to Atlanta.
And what year was that? 1940s somewhere?
I don't remember just when it was, but I came back and got a job at an architect's office here. And
which one was that?
I don't remember even which one it was now.
What were you doing?
And I worked, this must have been in, I don't remember. But I worked for a year or so before the war broke out. And
well, then it must have been in 1940 then.
It must.
The war came in 41.
Probably in 42 or somewhere along there. And at that time, I enlisted in the Marines and went overseas. Well, I didn't go overseas immediately because after I enlisted in the Marines, I went to Paris Island for boot camp, and when I finished, they kept me there as an instructor, as a drill instructor at boot camp. And then they sent me on to OCS at Quantico, and when I finished there, they kept me there as an instructor for quite a while, and I was taking the officer candidates through their course at Quantico. And I also made a film strip on military terminology while I was there. And then I was sent on overseas to Guadalcanal and to Okinawa, and I was in the invasion of Okinawa when it was...
My goodness. That was a far cry from being an actor, wasn't it?
Yes, indeed.
So you were in the war the whole duration until...
Right, until the end of the war.
VJ Day. And then you came back to where? Where did you go to? Back to Atlanta?
I came back to Atlanta, yes, but something happened on Okinawa which I'm still very unhappy about. While I was on Okinawa and before I left, even before the war ended, I did a number of sketches all over the island of various villages and natives and so forth. And after Okinawa was secured, I was able to do a lot, but the war was still going on, and I was up at the northern end of Okinawa, overlooking the invasion of one of the islands. I think it was Iwo Jima, or it may have been another. But I did a panoramic sketch of the invasion with all of the battleships and everything coming in, and I had about 20 or 30 sketches, which I would have loved to have had now, and I sent them home to my mother in the mail, and they never got there.
Oh.
I don't know whether the censor wanted them or someone decided they did, who saw them, and I never saw them again.
It could be there somewhere.
And I would have given anything in the world to have those sketches. I wonder who has them now.
They're probably in some library in the federal government somewhere. Who knows?
I don't know.
So you did come back to Atlanta.
I came back to Atlanta, and while I was waiting in Hawaii to come back, I did a portrait of a fellow officer whom I had known in OCS at Quantico. And it turned out so successfully that I thought, well, maybe I'll just do portrait.
And another career was born, huh?
And he sent it home to his wife, and she raved so about it. I thought, well, maybe I'll do that. And I got back to Atlanta, and I had a very good friend from New York who had been in the Army, who came down and stayed with me for a while, and he was a very one of the most interesting persons in the sense that he encouraged people to do things. He inspired them. Everyone liked him. And while he was staying with me, I had while I had been working in the architects in Atlanta before the war, I met a woman across the hall from the architects who ran an oil company, very wealthy woman, and we became quite good friends. And so while I spoke to her later, she saw the portraits, some that I'd done. I did a number of portraits of my mother and of Forrest, the friend who came down, and she saw them and wanted me to do a portrait of her and paid me $500 for it. And Forrest then urged me to come back to New York and do portraits. So I did that. I went back to New York and started doing portraits.
How did you get the people to do them? Did
you advertise? I took several that I had done while in Atlanta with me, and I showed them to people that I met there and friends. And I had one friend in New York who said, I know just the person you should meet. He says he's a Russian prince, and he's very social, and you get to meet all sorts of people who might like to do portraits. So he took me up to meet Michael, and we became very good friends. I loved to play bridge, and we had bridge parties all the time, and he played bridge. And sure enough, I met a number of people who wanted portraits done, and began doing portraits, and I was getting $2,000 a piece for them. And I met Mrs. Wendell Wilke. Wendell Wilke had died by that time, but when she saw the portraits, I began exhibiting them at Grand Central Galleries in New York. And she saw them there and wanted me to do one of Wendell Wilke from photographs that she had, which I did and turned out quite successfully. In fact, she was later being interviewed by Edward R. Murrow, and they focused on the portrait in the interview, and she said she wouldn't be able to keep the portrait because she had a tendency to cry every time she looked at it, that it was so real that she was going to give it to their son to keep.
What a compliment to you. What a compliment. So you did very well at that.
And I did one of Martha Berry at the Berry Schools, which hangs in the boardroom there. When I came back to Atlanta, I met Virginia Campbell of the Campbell Coal Company, they were at that time, and she wanted me to do one of Martha Berry, which I did, and I did one of her father also from photographs. He had died. And, so I did portraits for quite a number of years then.
We know you're in New York City and you're doing portraits. How long did you stay at that? And who are some of the people that you did?
I did portraits for about 4 or 5 years, and I was doing one of a society woman, and she began sitting, she was sitting from life, and she began saying, well, couldn't I just change this or do this or that? And I had never done anything like that because I felt that a portrait should be an exact likeness of the person and what they were. It's the way I wanted to do them, the way I felt portraits should be. But she kept insisting, well, can't I just change this or do this a little bit or do that? And to such an extent that I thought, well, she's paying for it, why not? So I began changing a little thing here and a little thing there, and then after it was finished, why, she wanted me to show it at the Russian Prince that I spoke of, a very social group to show the portrait. And when it was being shown, the only thing that anyone didn't like about it was the things that she had wanted me to do. And instead of saying that she had asked that I do that, she agreed with them.
Oh, dear.
And I have a temper. And I really hit the ceiling when she said yes, she thought that was true. And I got so mad that I said, I picked up the portrait and I said, you can all go to hell, I'll never do another portrait.
Oh my goodness.
And I never did another one commercially. I did several that I wanted to do, but I never did another portrait.
An abrupt end to a career.
Yeah.
Well, then what did you do?
Well, I had to do something. So I picked up the paper. At the time, I was living on East 40th Street, just a block off of Park Avenue. And I picked up the paper and found an ad for an architectural draftsman at an office at the corner of 40th and Park Avenue. So I thought, well, that's just half a block away. I'll go see if I can get the job. And I went, not really expecting to get it. But the next day they called me and asked me if I could come to work.
Well, you did have a degree in as an architect, so.
So I went to work and stayed for 23 years.
What company was
Became an associate in the firm before they went out of, I stayed until they went out of business.
What firm was it?
York and Sawyer. They were a very prestigious firm of architects. And they did mostly medical facilities, hospitals, and although they did schools and banks and other things also, but they specialized in medical facilities. And so but I forgot, while I was doing portraits, that's something I should have covered beforehand. While I was doing portraits, I had met Countess Devery, Hugh Devery, who worked for Elizabeth Arden. And Elizabeth Arden loved to have people with titles working for her. And Hugh was a very charming and delightful woman. And she and her husband, Count Gaitan, we became very good friends while I was doing portraits. And I played bridge. I loved to play bridge and we played. And one day Hugh said she knew I had studied architecture, although I was doing portraits at the time. She said, you know, Elizabeth Arden is constantly having plans for salons all over the country, and she's never happy with any of the architects she has do them. And says, why don't I introduce you to her, and maybe you should be doing it. There's no reason you shouldn't be doing them. And so I thought, well, okay. So she introduced me to Elizabeth Arden, and I had no problem. We seemed to get along very nicely, and I began doing layout. But Hugh had told me, she said, the reason she doesn't get along with the architects is that she doesn't like detailed drawings or working drawings, and she just takes the plans and gives them to a builder to do, and she doesn't want to fiddle with all the working, and if she doesn't, tells them to go ahead and build it, and if she doesn't like what it is, she'll tear it out and do it over. And I said, well, that would suit me fine, because I don't like doing working drawings. I love doing the preliminary plans and layouts. And so that's what I began doing. I began doing layouts for her salons at different places all over the country. I did one in Lexington, Kentucky, and I did any number, and we never had a problem. I always got along beautifully with her. And I did no working drawings, but I did this for quite a while, and it was quite lucrative. She paid very well.
You were doing that while you were still doing portraits?
While I was doing portraits. And then even after I started working for the architects, why, Elizabeth Arden's manager called me one day and said, would I please, they were doing a big new salon in Los Angeles, and would I please do it for them? And I said, I'm sorry, I can't now, because I'm working with a permanent job at architecture now. And he said, well, can't you get a leave of absence and do it for her? And I said, well, I'll speak to the office and see what they think about it. And I told them, and they agreed that fine, it would be all right, because actually I would be making 3 times as much money for doing these as I was doing for them. And those said, sure, go ahead and do it, take the leave of absence. And so I finished the drawing, the salon in Los Angeles, in Hollywood that I was doing, and I had one of the architects in my office there do some mechanical layouts for it and so forth, which I didn't enjoy doing anyway. And then I finished this, and they said, well, we're doing new offices on Fifth Avenue. Will you lay those out for us? And I asked again, and they said, okay, go ahead and do it. And so I did the new offices on Fifth Avenue for them, laid them out for them, and then I went back to work. I forgot about that while I was...
So you really were a practicing architect.
Oh, yes.
Yes, you were. And
I never got a license as an architect, though.
When you went to work with York and Sawyer, you were designing medical facilities then?
They did mostly hospitals. We did, and I was designing hospitals all over the country, all over the Northeast, particularly in New England. And
did you enjoy that time?
yes, I enjoyed it. The office was nice to work for, and I enjoyed the people I worked with, and it was.
Did you take a lot of satisfaction in what you created? It was a different kind of creating.
Right.
Is it a good feeling to go into a building that you had a big hand in?
Yes. It's, I remember one particularly, a hospital in Bethesda, Maryland, and they asked, York was dead. York and Sawyer both were dead, and Kiff, Voss, and Colleen it became. And Mr. Kiff was the head of the firm, and I've forgotten, Mrs. Carter was her name, the administrator of a hospital in Baltimore, Maryland. And she wanted him to, said Mrs. Carter had a little difficulty with most of the architects, and since she was a Southerner, he decided to put me on, that maybe I would get along with Mrs. Carter. And I never had any problem. We got along beautifully. And in fact, I have a letter she wrote him saying how wonderful Mr. Thompson was, and he got along with the doctors there so well. And but it seems that I was often doing things where Elizabeth Arden and Mrs. Carter had trouble with the architects, and
so you had good interpersonal skills in addition to creative.
Well, I had with those two at least.
Well, then what happened? The firm closed, you said, after 20 years?
So I stayed with them until the firm was closed. Finally, And meantime, it was during this 23 years that I was working for the architects that I began traveling and taking photographs. While I was doing portraits, I took photographs to do the base work for the portraits and then have them sit for life. And because of taking the photographs, I began printing them and doing them myself. I had a friend who lived in the apartment above me who was a professional photographer, Hildegard Sandhusen. And she had shown me how to develop and print and do all of the photography, and I became very much interested in it then. See, one thing leading to another again. And I became very much interested in doing photography. And I began doing, as I traveled around the world at different places taking pictures, I began printing my own prints and started doing that. So when the office closed, why, I just began doing photographs and began doing photography full time, basically. And
didn't have any gap in your career at all, huh?
No.
And then what did you do with all these photographs? You weren't just taking them for the fun of it.
Well, I got, well, here again, while I was doing photographs, while I was still working at the architect's office, one of the people I worked with at the office saw a lot of my photographs, and I would have exhibitions of them in the library at the office, and I also had an exhibition of them at the Architectural League. And he said, why, you should be doing, selling all of these photographs, because he said his wife worked at one of the advertising agencies, New Emmett, and said, why don't I send you over to see my wife and let's show them your photographs, and they'll use them, I'm sure. So I took some over, and they began using them in advertising, and that's why
another market opened up.
Right. So I began, I got an agent then, and now I have 3 agents, and I have the color photographs at Picture Perfect USA, and nothing but slides there. And I have also at Archive Photos, they have black and white and color, and at Omni Photo so I have 3 agents who handle them.
So you went from being on the front side of the camera in the advertisements to providing other things that were in the photos that were in the advertisements.
And the photographs were used all over the world in billboards and magazines and textbooks and encyclopedias. In fact, a lot of them used in the New American Heritage Dictionary. They sent me a dictionary because there were so many of them used in it.
How do you decide what you're going to photograph?
I just I began traveling. It was during the period I was working for the architects that I traveled so much. I did a lot of traveling at various jobs, and I would take photographs in the cities where I was. And then I became interested in traveling, and I began going to all the cities in the country, and then I began going all around the world in my vacations and taking time off and taking photographs. And in fact, as I said, I went all the way around the world 3 times taking photographs. And I've taken photographs of practically every country in the world, and at every city in the United States almost.
Did you focus on people or on architectural things, or what do you focus on?
Everything. Doesn't matter. People, in fact, I began doing portrait photographs and did quite a lot of those, and I have hundreds of thousands of them, as well as just architectural things and just anything that interests me anywhere in the world.
You have a real extensive collection of architectural photographs, do you?
I have an extensive thousands of every kind of photograph.
And does this interest persist? Even now, are you still taking photographs?
Well, I've broken one of my cameras, and I've just about given up doing photographs now, although I did a few this weekend, but not with my camera. A friend who wanted me to take some brought his camera to have me take some.
What would you say the secret of your success was as a photographer? The artistic eye?
I would think so. I mean, I have a sensitivity to color and to line and to form, and I think basically as a photographer, though, I think the printing of the pictures is more creative. It depends upon how you crop them, how you can dodge them to get more light or more shade at certain areas of the picture. And it's the printing of them which I found to be the most creative rather than the taking of them.
So, there's a lot more to it than just point and shoot.
I think so.
What would you say of all the careers you've had, and there have been so many careers, what was the ones, or is there any, that gave you the most satisfaction?
Well, I have enjoyed each of them while I was doing them. I would have liked to have been an actor.
That's the one frustration you had?
That's a great frustration.
Did you ever think when you were at Georgia Tech about performing in the theater at that time?
No.
You never joined marionettes or thought about doing that?
No, never.
It wasn't until you were introduced to being on the other side of the camera that you got those ideas to be an actor? Is it too late for you to go be an actor now?
Oh, please.
Well, you've been acting for us this morning. We think you're doing a wonderful job.
No, no one wants to look at an old, wrinkled, ugly person anyway.
I doubt that.
You can only be an actor successfully when you're young, and you can remain old and ugly then. If you are successful then you have created a personality which is attractive still.
Have you ever,
as an older person?
Have you met any actors?
Yes. Well, I don't know whether you ever remember Russell Hardy in the movies. He was a leading man. He wasn't a star. I became very good friends with him, and I met Dolores Del Rio and took her out a number of times. Do you remember her? When I was...
Well, do you think in having met those people that they were happier than...
No.
No. It's just it's something you didn't do, so...
That's right.
Because you pretty much did everything that occurred to you, didn't you?
Everything, fortunately, just came along and broke for me.
Did your education at Georgia Tech help you, you think, over the years?
Oh, well, of course. I mean, it's part of growing up and of maturing as a person. And any education which you have is a part of creating what you are as you live your entire life.
So it was a definite influence.
Definitely.
In the early days of Georgia Tech, it was never thought of as a place of anything but technology.
That's right.
The North Avenue Trade School was its early history.
Now it's quite different, is it not? Obviously, from...
But even your experience as a creative person, you were nurtured there. You felt,
oh, yes.
You felt you were given creative outlet.
Well, of course, I was doing watercolor and charcoal and pencil drawing, which created my portraits completely. They were still drawn completely with pencil.
And you were encouraged to do all these things?
Yes.
As part of your school?
I would not have done them had I not had the training at Georgia Tech.
It's amazing that this rich flow of creativity came out of a technological background. It's quite amazing.
It is a little strange. Normally, people would be more interested in the technical side of things. But I was always more interested in the creative side, not the technical. That's why working drawings didn't particularly interest me.
They were just something that had to be gotten through, huh?
Right.
Well, your story is very, very interesting, Mr. Thompson. Can you think of any other things that you want to share with us of this very full life that you've had?
Well, there are probably many things, but particularly in my travels, I've had many interesting incidents of various things that...
Have you traveled by all means of transportation?
Oh, yes.
Trains, airplanes?
By boat and planes and trains.
And as you've met the world, has the world welcomed you?
I have never had any unfortunate or unhappy incidents other than minor travel things of that sort. But I mean, so far as people, I don't recall any unhappy incidents anywhere in the world that I've had. And I've had many interesting incidents in various places.
Do you have a favorite place to go?
I have several favorite places that I like. Venice is one of them, and Dubrovnik is one of them. That's where all of the problems now are, the former Yugoslavia, you know. Dubrovnik is a fascinating place pictorially. It was a resort much like Monte Carlo, but ancient and interesting, built on. Have you ever, do you know, there are some pictures I have here which you should see.
I'll have to look at that.
And Machu Picchu in Peru is another fascinating place that I like very much.
Places you'd like to go back to again someday?
I have been back to many of them. And China is fascinating in its many forms of all kinds. The Lijiang River in China, which has hundreds of miles of peaks just going up along. Have you ever seen pictures of it? It's a fascinating place. But there are thousands of fascinating places all over the world. India is particularly interesting, too, to me.
You've managed to find a lot of them, if not all of them, huh? Over
Right.
the years. And record them in your wonderful, wonderful pictures that you take.
Well, I've enjoyed doing it, and I have thousands of pictures or records of it.
It's a great heritage.
And I'm using many of them in my autobiography also.
And the book is in process, and we'll look forward
I
to
finished it a number of years ago, supposedly, and as I continue living, I've had to write 3 editions.
Well, we'll look forward to
I use, I think I told you, I have saved every letter written to me since I was in high school, and I use those throughout to depict, and that's the problem I'm having with, if I ever get it published, is to get permission for the use of all the letters and photographs of people, which I have to have, and I don't want to publish it without it being using these letters and photographs, because to me they are what make it interesting and what make it of interesting from a variety of perspectives rather than just my own personal view.
So when you get through the bureaucracy of all this, then we'll add author to your titles.
I hope so, certainly.
I hope so, too. Thank you very much for your story, Mr. Thompson. We've enjoyed hearing it.
Well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.